Okay, thank you folks for getting back so quickly. We'll call this meeting to order. First order of business, disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none, motion to move into the committee of the whole. Jaguar, Marks, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jaguar.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchbach.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
8-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Reports and committees and outside boards. First one is the Woodland Conservation Bylaw Review. So Jeff, are you doing that or Julie?
It's the three of us together.
Oh, okay.
Lead today's
Who
presentation.
wants to lead? Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of council and to Jennifer. Great to see you. This is a great opportunity as council was meeting with a facilitator to wrap up the performance measurements and metrics associated with the strategic plan, to also touch base on the Woodlands Conservation Bylaw. So we have put together a brief presentation to get us started before we hand things over to Jennifer Kirkham, who will lead a discussion and gather your feedback. So there are a few slides that have been prepared and submitted to you in advance. The first slide details the links to council's strategic plan and where the bylaw can be found for members of the public who are interested. It's either posted on the county's website or Kettle Creek Conservation Authority's website. In January, this was introduced to council in support of council's strategic plan as part of the staff operational plan. And undertaking a review of the Woodlands Conservation Bylaw is indicated in the staff operational plan under the action item for 2020, fostering a healthy environment strategic priority. And in March, County Council officially endorsed their strategic plan. And in May, I presented an update to council on the progress of the operational plan. The purpose of this review, and the reason why you're gathered today to discuss this, is that some feedback has been received that a review of bylaw 0503 or the Woodlands Conservation Bylaw should be considered. We hope to gather feedback from councillors about the types of concerns that, if any, that you've heard from residents with respect to the Woodlands Conservation Bylaw. As well, we'd like to hear individual councillor concerns. And in terms of next steps, there is no expectation that council make a decision today. Instead, we're hoping to have an open discussion about this, and we'll seek official direction from council at a successive council meeting. And we'll compile feedback from council into a report and provide recommendations at that time. We have an MOU, or a memorandum of agreement rather, with Kettle Creek Conservation Authority for a tree commissioner and weed inspector position. And this is a contracted service arrangement. And this arrangement was initiated in 1999 and is reviewed on an annual basis. We have some additional agreements that are in place with Middlesex County for short-term coverage in the event of illness or vacation. No further ado, I would like to pass things over to the County Solicitor, Stephen Gibson, to provide a high-level legislative overview.
The legislative overview really involved the next three sides. The bylaws passed pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, Section 135. There is a excerpt of what I consider the significant elements. The key, I think, for us is to understand that the bylaw is enacted pursuant to Municipal Act authority. There is a bit of shared jurisdiction. The upper and lower tiers can both establish woodlands conservation bylaws, but if an upper tier municipality establishes that kind of bylaw, that occupies the field and it suspends the operation of the lower tier bylaw. We also have allowance for, under section 135.10, for lower tier municipality delegation or all or part of its power to pass the bylaw. And that's in fact what was undertaken in this jurisdiction back when 0503 was initially enacted. So the lower tiers have delegated their authority to the upper tier. In terms of the third slide dealing with penalties, the primary penalty, or there's a combination of penalties provided for within the legislation. Firstly, fines, which they can range from a per tree to a lump sum being by the court. The other issue is the associated orders. That's allowed for under Section 431 of the Municipal Act, allows for prohibition orders. That's in subsection A, for prohibiting the continuation of the offense by the person convicted, and B provides for requiring the person to correct a contravention. That is in fact through reforestation, and we've already heard about that today. So that's the legislative framework. I'm going to address then the elements of woodlands conservation regulation here in Elgin. Really, there's two tools. There's the bylaw, and then there is the tree canopy and natural vegetation policy. In terms of the bylaw itself, the goals of the bylaw are established at the beginning of the bylaw, and it does speak to preservation and improvement of woodland resources, promotion of good forestry and utilization practices, minimization of the destruction and injury of trees, regulation and control of removal or destruction of trees, as well as recognizing the entitlement of landowners to utilize and enjoy the woodlands. So there is protection, and there's a combination of protection, but protection which recognizes landowner rights. But those are competing interests, and they have to be balanced within the framework of the bylaw. The next slide deals with application of the bylaw itself, and this is the preliminary question that has to be dealt with within any question of whether or not there is a process applies or whether or not a violation has occurred. But does the bylaw apply? That question is really directed to whether or not there is a woodlands. A woodlands requires a woodlot of a threshold area that meets minimum density. So you have to have those particular qualifications met. That being said, there are a number of exceptions within both the Municipal Act that have been incorporated within the bylaw. So it's not, the exceptions aren't made in Elgin provisions. They are, so even if a woodlot is a woodlands, there may be exceptions. I've listed out the exceptions. Those aren't the exact words, I should warn you. Those are simply my summary of the exceptions. A couple to bring to your attention. There's an exception for municipal activities. There's an exception if council has granted the exemption, and this council has heard a couple of those exemption matters. There are an exemption for a normal farm practice. There is another piece of legislation which addresses whether or not a bylaw provision interferes with a normal farm practice. There's a board that's established, and oftentimes prosecutions are delayed or suspended to allow that type of application to be made for determination if the bylaw is interfering with a normal farm practice. And there are also owner use allowances, but those are not complete exceptions. There are certain conditions that are attached to them. For instance, XI, the exception is to an owner of woodlands for his or her own use, but subject to maintenance of the required density standards. So there is, an owner has the right, certain restricted rights of own use. In terms of the next slide, just refers to the prohibitions. The first set of prohibitions are the general prohibitions. The bylaw prohibits harvesting, destroying, or injury of trees unless undertaken either in accordance with good forestry practice or circumference limit thresholds. Good forestry practice is a defined term. It's based upon compliance with silviculture principles and regulations and the protection and maintenance of environmental conditions and habitats. There are also certain exceptions, for instance, dealing with diseased or damaged trees that can be removed. The second general prohibition is that it has to be undertaken in accordance with circumference limit thresholds. There is a schedule to the bylaw which essentially protects smaller trees, smaller circumference trees, and which allows for harvest only if the minimum circumference measurements are achieved. There are also specific prohibitions, and there are a number of those. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, but there are specific. So even if there is a general prohibition that isn't violated, there are specific prohibitions that could be violated. For instance, you can't harvest in a conifer plantation. There has to be proper marking. That if there is a contravention of conditions to a permit, an order can't be removed or defaced, and I guess I'll leave it at that. But you can have a specific violation even though a general prohibition isn't violated. Next slide. There is a provision, and you have heard a couple of these. For a council exemption, essentially allows a woodlands to be cleared if council permits it. Oftentimes it is in relation to, these days, to subdivision developments or potentially in relation to field expansions. You are familiar with the process. The landowner submits an application to the tree commissioner. Tree commissioner reviews and processes the application. If the tree commissioner establishes conditions or denies the application, the matter comes back to council for its hearing, and you have had 2 of those hearings before you during your term. The next slide deals with the general application and permission to harvest, injure, destroy trees. So often dealt with in terms of a bush lot. It's a more focused or specific process. A notice is delivered to the tree commissioner who can review, and if the tree commissioner in his discretion believes that the harvest should not be undertaken, there is essentially a stop put to the process. The tree commissioner can establish conditions, and if the harvest is allowed to proceed, there are procedural requirements, including notice of commencement of the work and erection of signage. Next slide deals with another process within the bylaw. In 2018, council enacted a slope regulation. Essentially, it added some procedural requirements if the harvest, whether or not it's 1 or 2 trees even, but where the harvest is located upon or within a woodland that is located upon specified slopes. The additional requirements generally involved a requirement for pre-consultation with the tree commissioner. And if the tree commissioner requires, there is a necessity for a forester's report or an arborist report or a geotechnical report to address the integrity of the slope. This is a made in Elgin requirement. At this stage, it applies only to specified slopes in central Elgin, but the bylaw has been established to allow for other municipalities to request designation of slopes within their boundaries. So that's the bylaw itself. The second element of the woodland conservation or woodland protection in Elgin is the tree canopy and natural vegetation policy, which was approved by this council in 2019. At present, this is a standalone policy required under the Municipal Act, but it may well be given consideration for incorporation of the official plan at the time of review. The policy identifies the various methods by which there is protection of woodlands or trees as a natural resource, including the Elgin Natural Resource Study, the Elgin Official Plan. Decisions under the Planning Act references Elgin's position as the approval authority under the Planning Act for certain development applications, and then the bylaw itself. The next few files deal with specific elements of the getting back to the bylaw. There is a connection between 0503 and the ministry. Historically, the ministry developed and circulated a model bylaw. Our bylaw is certainly in keeping with the ministry model. And that is consistent with most rural focused municipalities in southwestern Ontario. There is that enacted a bylaw. They generally followed the bylaw model put forth by the ministry. Urban municipalities, if a bylaw were enacted, for instance, in London, tends to follow a more streamlined bylaw, more streamlined processes because of the more limited approach to the more limited woodlands within the area. And again, you get back to what's the definition of a woodlands. If it has when it has an area and density requirement, there are limited woodlands within an urban center. Next deals with one of the realities of the bylaw. There is very limited appeal processes. The bylaw does refer to an appeal process to the Ontario Municipal Board with respect to permit conditions. That jurisdiction was repealed in the legislation some years ago. It's still in the bylaw, for instance. That's one of the housekeeping requirements that would need to be undertaken. And I'll have some comments on that. Other than that, there is no express appeal process within the bylaw, although any decision by the tree commissioner and or council would be subject to judicial review in the Superior Court of this province. Dealing with the staff perspective on the bylaw, I did include a number of comments, but I guess from my perspective, and that's as the county solicitor and also as the prosecutor, my general I guess, attitude or view of the bylaw is that the bylaw itself, from a legal and a regulatory perspective, is appropriate legislation. It is recognized that there were competing interests. Those competing interests, although some wouldn't necessarily agree with me, those competing interests are in fact accounted for within the legislation. I have from time to time heard various complaints about the bylaw, that it either is too strong or too weak. If you ever apply that to a litigation scenario, if you got everybody mad at it, it's a fair bylaw. And that is, quite frankly, my approach. And so admittedly, that's from a legal perspective and a regulatory perspective, not necessarily from a financial perspective, from or political perspective, but that's my view on it. A couple of slides on the prosecution experience, which I have been involved with since in about 2008, when we started these prosecutions. Again, outlined a number of items, but from my perspective and a prosecutorial perspective, it has been a positive experience. There have been a number of convictions resulting in fines, resulting in associated orders. That's, quite frankly, not the point, and never was the point of most prosecutions. The point was gaining compliance, and secondly, general deterrence. And it'd be my submission that that has been accomplished. And I think that one of the ways that you can see that is that we haven't had many prosecutions in the last few years. In the first few years, the prosecution was at the bush lot cutting, and there were a number of successful prosecutions, I'd say dozens of charges, and eventually those prosecutions, there was compliance achieved, and those prosecutions were not as often required. They wouldn't show up. More recently, it's been the prosecution has been in respect of unauthorized field expansions. Again, there was a number of those types of prosecutions in the 2012 to 2015 time period. There have been less and less. And again, I view that as compliance, as an indicator of compliance. You are not going to always get everybody who is violating, whatever kind it is. We have limited enforcement and inspection staff, but I think what I'd like you to take away from prosecution is we're not prosecuting for the sake of prosecution approach. It is focused prosecution, seeking compliance, and then specific and general deterrence. And I think it has been successful to that end. The next screen just deals with how the bylaw was established. There are some on council that were probably around at that point. There was certainly public involvement in, I believe, an advisory committee. I know that when I was involved as a much younger lawyer at that point, I got in at the very end and was simply asked to review and report to the advisory committee itself. The advisory committee had a number of representatives from the public, and that was, again, with reference to competing interests. So there was input that way. The next few slides deal with the type of review, what the council may be considering, I think there are really two options when it comes to this review. You can have either the focused housekeeping review, which would involve simply a staff direction and then coming back with a staff report and draft amending bylaw. The second would be a more fulsome review. If a more fulsome review is undertaken, I think council has to consider what process to follow, whether or not there's going to be committee involvement, whether or not there's going to be public consultation. The public consultation is not requisite under the legislation. Certainly the first by 0503 took a number of years to come forward. And so I think that the time frame, that's the time frame that you could expect. I think what you also could expect would be presentations and representations that object to the whole concept of woodlands conservation. I think that you should expect that. When we were doing the slope regulation, there were public consultation meetings, and probably more of the public comments were directed to the entire concept of woodlands conservation rather than just slope regulation. And the answer at that time was, well, we're not dealing with the entire bylaw, we're just dealing with this amendment to it. But if a more fulsome approach, and that's again within council purview to decide what that is, but it would attract that higher level objection. We should be aware of that.
Anybody else involved? Is Jeff involved in this as well?
Jeff was involved. I think unless Jeff has some specific comments, I think he was asked to attend in the event that there were some questions he could assist in.
Okay. So we have a very intensive report. Anybody have any questions or comments on the woodland conservation bylaw? Sally?
Mr. Warden,
I got Sally first and then you, Bob.
thank you.
My feeling all along when we were first talking about this was a housekeeping type review. I was assuming that Jeff Lawrence and yourself, Steve, et cetera, would be just looking at it and seeing what needed to be updated, like the OMB aspect and fines, et cetera. Like, are they limited in the bylaw? Like,
There are aspects that I think could be addressed as a housekeeping.
yeah, and my feeling was, 2002, 18 years ago, and I know all about it and when it went on because my husband
Sure
was
you
on
do.
the committee. But I just thought maybe some things needed to be updated because it's been 18 years. That was all. I was not looking for a fulsome review, just, to give
Right.
Mr. Lawrence, et cetera, some help in whatever, yourself in prosecution.
Right, and there are aspects that are identified through prosecutions that that if there are some problems that we experienced in prosecutions, Mr. Lawrence and I would have been the primary participants in those prosecutions, and I have some ideas on that as well. There are also items in there that we've never ever haven't had to prosecute, but I've never seen any violations. So there are certainly housekeeping matters.
That's all.
Just one other statement, in the slope stabilization, for those of you who weren't on council when we did that, we were having major issues in Port Stanley, in particular, along the cliffs where it was forested and people were going in, even on municipal property and other people's private property, and cutting trees so they could have a nice view of the lake. And we right now are in a several $1 million project right now to stabilize the road that they destabilized by cutting those trees. Front Street in Port Stanley. So that was what really triggered Central Elgin, and we'd had a lot of complaints from people down there with seeing neighbors cutting trees on their property. They're like the neighbor's property.
Bob, you had a question?
Yes, I'm also in favor of a housekeeping review. However, there are a couple little points that I want to know if we can just roll them into housekeeping. One would be that we put in a simple line that says the county's strategic plan and their heritage forestry documents or whatever should be considered during any reviews, and just tie the pieces together that way without getting into any bigger project.
Thank you, Bob. Ed, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to, and I think I do agree with both Sally and Bob that what a housekeeping review, I think is appropriate. I was going to ask staff and or Jeff if there are any large incidents of aberrant behavior that, some illegal cutting going on, more so than you would anticipate under normal circumstances, that requires a more fulsome review. Otherwise, I'm quite comfortable with just the housekeeping review. You've already identified, Steve, several items that might need to be updated just from a legislative nature. But if there is a real big problem, and perhaps maybe if you've got some examples of some of the criticisms that are out there, that might lead us to change our mind and to go for a more intensive review. But I'm more comfortable with the housekeeping review. And yes, Sally, I served with John on that original
I know you did.
bylaw.
Duncan?
Through you, Mr. Warden. I think we've just done the housekeeping review at this session, have we not? Have you not highlighted pretty well everything that needs to be changed? No?
Not specifically.
Okay, all right. I didn't know whether there was a lot more things in there. My experience with the tree bylaw, yes, as you mentioned, goes back a long ways. I believe in 1976, I was charged under the law for cutting trees down.
I didn't want to bring that up.
You know that?
That wasn't this bylaw, but that was the tree bylaw.
Yeah. And
I think I was in high school.
yeah. So, I've got a fair bit of experience, and then having had the opportunity to work through it back in the early 2000s. But I think one of the critical things that Elgin County Council did was when we formed an alliance with the Conservation Authority. That was when you then brought in the expertise of the Conservation Authority to assist us in forest management. And I think that was a big step forward, and certainly that relationship has been very good for the county, and I hope it continues on into the future. And you can relay that, Jeff, to anybody that you happen to be talking to at the Conservation Authority, that you guys have done a good job for us. All in all, the thing has worked well. Living close to Chatham, Kent, I see what goes on over there. Even going back to the 70s when this first started to become an issue, Elgin County Council realized the fact that there was something needed to be done and did something about it. And certainly I applaud those people way back in those days for realizing it. So I'm really feel that a housekeeping review is all that is necessary here. I don't think that we need to go back to the drawing board, and I think it's a sound bylaw that just needs a good eye on and put into 2020 perspective.
Thank you, Duncan, and I agree. I don't think we want to open this up to the general public, because the same individuals that don't want you to can have any control over their property, even though it's for the common good, will always be objecting. And the woodland bylaw is only as good as if you're willing to enforce it. I do know that in the past that most tree cutters are responsible, but the ones that aren't, look for the ones or the counties where they're not willing to enforce it or not taking a very good close eye on it. And they just move to the path of least resistance. So we've experienced that in the past. And once they were found out they were willing to prosecute them, they moved on to somewhere else. So I think that the process is adequate. And I'll just ask Jennifer. Jennifer, if you anything to add to the woodland bylaw?
Me?
Yes.
I was going to say it seems like you're coming to a decision point, but I think you should probably hear from all voices around the table. So I've heard at least five people speak to sort of doing a housekeeping review. Are others interested in housekeeping review? Others interested in a more fulsome review? So where are people at in terms of the bylaw?
Tom,
Housekeeping.
Dominique?
Well, I was curious why we're here. If there's already a consensus about a housekeeping issue, why are we having a special meeting? Why, including with a paid facilitator? So I'm reading between the lines that there were concerns. So how come I'm not hearing any concerns right now? So I'm a little bit surprised. I'd like to hear more of the history of why we're here in this setup. And I personally, I would say that 2002 is a long time ago, and a lot has changed. And I would be interested in a more fulsome analysis of the cost. How much have we spent on enforcement vis-a-vis the outcome? I'd be quite happy to find out. I'm hearing right now this is working, but that's, again, from a prosecution and alleged deterrence, it's working. But I'd like to see, but how much is it costing to save every tree? And could we compare that with other ways where for sometimes a lesser expense can actually achieve a greater outcome, believe it or not? And there are studies to that effect, and there's science to that effect in terms of managing private land property owner behavior. So I think we have an official plan review coming, and I think this is something that deserves, like anytime we touch on property landowner rights, it deserves a review and attention. It deserves the public's input. And I would give it its due time, and I would integrate it with the official plan review, because I think that's where it makes sense, and not separate it from and do like sort of piecemeal kind of approach to our planning. So those are my thoughts, and definitely interested in more of the history.
Okay, Mary, we haven't heard from you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. First of all, because I'm from an urban area, we do approach things a little bit different, as was mentioned in the report. We do have an extensive tree policy in Aylmer, and we've worked, hard on that policy through our environmental committee. So I do look at it a little bit differently, but at this point, I don't see a lot of problems, and I think maybe just housekeeping is all we need to be doing right now, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Jennifer, we'll turn it back to you.
So let me sort of recap. I'm hearing a lot of voices saying a housekeeping review. I've also heard Dominique ask sort of question around why was it brought forward to a special meeting? So were there concerns or issues that were raised around bringing it forward? Were they specifically around housekeeping? Dominique is also suggesting perhaps looking at return on investment in terms of the cost of enforcement versus the outcomes you're getting from it. And that perhaps a more fulsome review could be included as part of the official plan review. So that's sort of what I'm hearing from people. I don't know, Julie, if you want to chat a bit about why now, so why the bylaw came forward to a special meeting today.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council. This, as I noted early in the presentation, was one of the staff action plans associated with council's strategic plan. And council has a small amount of work to do to complete the strategic plan. So the facilitator was engaged to complete the strategic plan. I felt it was efficient to use this format through which council can openly provide feedback, discuss metrics. It seems a bit more conversational, perhaps, more conducive to gathering feedback and providing additional orientation from staff for subject-specific matters. So we could have brought forward a report and my advice to council is I wouldn't read too much into the format of this. So perhaps, it seems a bit more formal than what we were seeking. But really it was that we're killing two birds with one stone and having Jennifer, making the most efficient use of Jennifer, the facilitator's time, knowing there's a small bit of strategic planning work to be done. And this achieves at least the first part of one of the council action plans, which supports council's strategic plan. So just to provide a little bit more background, I would describe the feedback and concerns that we were hearing from council as more of rumblings. So we as staff couldn't really discern what the concerns were, whether those concerns were coming from individual council members, whether those were coming from or relayed to fellow councilors, staff, and the public on behalf of citizens. We couldn't say whether the concerns were relative to enforcement or bylaw, or whether it was the housekeeping items. So this really was held to just gather that feedback so that we could come back to council and provide some recommendations which would support council in the direction that you provide to staff. So hopefully that addresses the concerns. Any follow-up questions that you think I could address at this time?
No, it seemed to imply that concerns were heard. Just the way it is presented, because the question is, what is the nature of the concerns you have heard? And I'm not hearing any, so I'm surprised.
Mr. Warden? if
Go
I
ahead,
may.
Bob.
It's Bob Purcell. One of the concerns was when we brought forward or we adopted the recommendations around heritage, forestry heritage. There are different ways of looking at it. The forestry heritage is different than the bylaw. It's like somebody looking at a farm and loves all animals and doesn't think any of them should ever be used for food versus the farmer who grows them for food. So there were some concerns that might cause some issues if it was incorporated in the bylaw, or if it got too convoluted, or we went into that full process. So that was a big issue that staff needed some direction on. That's why I'm suggesting we can just point at that when we do the housekeeping review and say, you should consider, not must, should consider the heritage canopy documentation or position of the county. So that's just housekeeping from my perspective. The other was, we weren't sure as a group whether or not the whole thing had to be, or we even wanted to until this meeting, go through a fulsome review or just a review. It's obvious from this meeting that almost every counselor is more than willing just to have a housekeeping review and leave it at that. With regards to the cost effectiveness, that's something that our staff do regularly. They recommend to us when we're doing something that doesn't make any sense financially. So I don't think as a counselor I want to tie up staff. They're too busy now with all the things they have to do, trying to justify individual items like that. And also with our service review that's ongoing, anything like that should have been picked up already. So I would just leave that alone at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So we've heard from around the table. Jennifer, where do you want to go from here?
Well, I think the purpose of today's session was for Julie and staff to get a sense of where you were as a council in terms of sort of reviewing or not the Woodlands Conservation Bylaws. So as Julie said in her introduction, they'll be bringing back a report with a recommendation on how they'll move forward with it. I don't know if Julie wants to speak some more about that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council. We will provide a report at the October 13th meeting that just details and discusses some of the feedback that we received today, just to confirm kind of the general consensus and some other concerns, as well as we'll identify some next steps for council. And we'll specifically detail some of the housekeeping items that we would recommend be amended, as well. We'll provide some comments on the request for additional information and kind of aligning this review or housekeeping review with elements of the official plan.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Do we need anything more on the woodlands conservation? Let's move on to the strategic plan. Jennifer, are you gonna lead us through this one?
I am. Julie, do you want to do any kickoff comments?
No, I think in the interest of time, I'll just pass things right over to you.
Okay. So I'm trying to think back to when was the last time we talked about the strategic plan. I think it might be prior to the COVID lockdown. So probably would have been about February-ish. So what we did at that point in time is we did a tour back through your 3 strategic priorities, your goals and objectives, and you identified a strategic outcome for each of your strategic priorities. And I know in your package, agenda package, that you will see them in there. So the final piece we wanted to focus on today to wrap it up was talking about performance measures. So how will you know if you've been successful in terms of achieving or moving forward with your strategic plan 3 years from now? So what are some of those measures or indicators that we'll put in place to help you determine that? So I know Julie and her staff did put some draft ideas together for you. Am I able to share my screen?
I think so.
Okay, let me check and see if I can. I don't think I can see what I want to share with you though. Just a minute. There we go. Okay.
We got it.
Very colorful. So what I did for sort of ease of discussion today is you'll see you've got your 3 strategic priorities. So serving Elgin, growing Elgin, investing in Elgin. You've got your goals, your objectives. So the strategic outcomes, that's what you're hoping will be different because of focusing work in each of your 3 strategic priorities. So under serving Elgin, your outcome is stakeholders benefit from solutions that meet Elgin community needs. Under growing Elgin, you have residents and visitors experience a vibrant community that is sustainable. And under investing in Elgin, you have optimized use of resources to support an affordable, healthy, engaged community. So what we want to do today is figure out what will you measure to know that you're successful in terms of moving towards these 3 outcomes. And what your staff have done is gone through your operational plan or your work plan and have identified some sort of sample performance measures to get you thinking about how you might measure it. So I'm going to suggest we start with the serving Elgin stream. So that's about redesigning how you respond to community need in a creative, sustainable way. You're going to align your current services and programs with community need. You're going to explore different ways of addressing community need, and you're going to engage with your community and other stakeholders, with the outcome being that they benefit from solutions that meet Elgin community needs. So some of the sample performance measures, just to get you thinking about it, so things you could measure to tell you if you're moving toward that, are your level of municipal partner engagement and satisfaction, sort of with you as a county, the number of recommendations from the service delivery review that are approved, a development of a list of local priorities. So that's the action you had around sort of identifying, is there a county role in any priorities at the local level, meeting attendance at municipal partner council meetings, and number of CAO and warden visits to local municipal partner councils, number of provincial modernization initiatives that the county participates in, technology implemented to make council activities more accessible, and number of participants at public information centers, which is a bit of a challenge at this point in time. So what I wanted to do is sort of get your sense, are there any from this list, if we use it as a starting point, that you like or that you think will help you measure whether or not you're achieving these objectives, which will drive you to your strategic outcomes? Are there any from that list that you say, yes, I think that is a good measure to help us know we're moving forward with the strategic plan? If you like it, let me know. I'll give it a little highlight.
Anyone have any ones they want to pinpoint?
Jennifer, is there any way you can make just that green part a little bigger? I'm finding it difficult when
Yeah.
I'm sitting to read it.
How's that?
That's much better, thank you. I can read it now.
Great. So we'll look at the ones on this page in green, then I'll go down to the next page. But are there any here that you think are good measures to let you know you are achieving these objectives? I'm not hearing any. That's okay. There may be none from that list. Let's go to this one down here. So are there any from here, these three that you think would let you know you are working toward achieving your objectives?
I'm not so sure about the number of participants at public information centers. Certainly, if things are going good, very seldom you get a lot of people out. If things are going bad, then you have all kinds of people. So I'm not so sure if that's a very perspective of whether you're doing something right or not.
Yeah, so does it tell you that you're engaging with your community though and other stakeholders? That's certainly one of your objectives, right? Like how would you measure that? How would you know that you are engaging with your community? You've got some, you've got your meeting attendance at your municipal partner council meetings. You've got your visits to municipal partner councils. You've got the participants at public information centers. Are there other ways though that you would know that you're engaging with your community and other stakeholders?
Well, I'll give you an example. When you have a 15% raise in taxes, everybody's there. If you get a 2%, nobody's there.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think we did a survey, toward the other, and I think we got a really good engagement of the public. So surveys, to me, occasionally when we need them for something we're proposing or doing, that's another way of engaging or measuring. That was measuring. I agree with Dave though entirely, and if it's a positive thing, you're not going to get anybody out much. But if it's something that negatively impacts them or they feel it does, then you get a large number.
So what Sally's saying is maybe there's something like this, which is the level of response to general public surveys. So are you engaging people that way?
But there may be something about the number of opportunities and the number of the different ways. If we provided multiple access points, so we provided print and online and physical information centers. So if we could measure by the number of opportunities and the number of methods that we offered.
My keyboard doesn't change. My stomach.
It's not.
How does that look, Dominique? Is it range or number? Number?
Yeah, variety. Yeah, no, number of methods. That's easy to measure then. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so we got 3 suggested here. Level of response to general public surveys, number of opportunities for community or stakeholder engagement, number of methods used for community stakeholder engagement. That certainly helps you get to this one, which is engaging with your community and other stakeholders. To me, it would include your municipal partners, right? Because they are one of your stakeholders.
How would you measure the level of engagement? That next bullet, when it says satisfaction and engagement, how would you measure that?
That was a staff suggestion. To me, you'd have to do a survey. So it'd be like a self-reported, how engaged they feel they are with the county, how satisfied they are.
Okay.
Jennifer, just to kind of move this along, one of the easy ways that most companies do to measure that is they track any of their complaints and then put them into buckets so that they know where they're coming from and whether or not they're useful or they're just unhappy people.
And
Do you
service.
track complaints right now, Julie?
Not many. I don't think to the same level that our local municipal partners might get due to the volume of staff who interact with members of the public. So I'm not sure that that would be very reflective of what you're trying to achieve here.
I would argue, the same notion with regarding questionnaires or surveys or things out there. Participation rate, I would think, would be extremely low unless you were able to engage something on a website that's asking for comments. How are we doing? But otherwise, to just go out and solicit the general public, there's going to be burnout and they're not going to pay attention, in my opinion.
Kelly?
Something that Central Elgin did is we've got a web presence now called Let's Talk Central Elgin, and every project we are working on is on there now with exact explanation of what's being done, what's it costing, et cetera, timelines, the whole thing. And there is a place where then they can respond or ask questions. And that might be an idea. It's under, we call it Let's Talk Central Elgin, but I'm trying to remember what the name of the company was that
Bang the table.
Bang the Table, yes.
Yeah.
Julie?
Yeah.
We do project-specific initiatives like this where we gather feedback, say on the Port Bruce Bridge, and report publicly on costs and progress. But it doesn't all come together in a streamlined way. So I guess when we consider specific projects, there are complaints that are received that I'm thinking of a higher kind of corporate level, but there are service-specific complaints that just aren't streamlined. That could be a metric.
But you do put out special web pages, et cetera, like the King George Lift Bridge right now. There's a site you can go to check. We just liked the Bang the Table one because it put them all in one site. So you could look at every project going on.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's sort of a flow to these. So sort of the two that Dominique suggested would be, how many opportunities do you have for community or stakeholder engagement? How many methods did you use? And then how many people were engaged? Which would include surveys, it could include hits or comments on a website, it could include whatever, but it's sort of that level of engagement around those sort of community and stakeholder engagement pieces. So it gives you another look at it. Could be something like number of individuals. I don't want to use the word engaged again, involved or participating in community stakeholder engagement opportunities. So you're not specifically talking about surveys, but it could be beyond that, right? How many people are actually engaging? What do you think of something like that? So you sort of have the flow. How many opportunities were there? Did we use? How many methods did we use? How many people actually participated?
Yeah.
Does that make
I think
sense
that
for that
works.
one? I thought it's good at covering off this one, which is engaging with our community and other stakeholders. What about some of these other ones? So you have your first one is ensuring alignment of current programs and services with community need. So that could come out of community engagement as well. We also have exploring different ways of addressing community need. Any of these fit that? I'm going to suggest that that one is engagement. That's engagement. That's engagement.
Something we're doing at present is our community safety and well-being plan, which is where we're engaging all different groups throughout all of our communities.
Yeah, we have that one under growing Elgin. So to be the place where people want to live, work, and play. So you'll see level of participation in the development of the community safety and well-being plan. So is there anything around the service delivery review? Because that's certainly about ensuring alignment. It's about exploring different ways.
Yeah, I think what you have there can work. I mean, the number of recommendations that, I don't know if they're approved or
Is it implemented?
implemented, adopted.
What do people think about that?
I think you had another one about number of modernization.
Yeah, so number of
Initiatives.
provincial, yeah, that you participate in.
To me, that lines up better with number 2.
Mm,
Yeah, so with exploring different ways, yeah.
Yeah.
What about the technology? Because that's certainly a different piece. So are you going to have technology implemented to make council activities more accessible? Like, is that a performance measure? Or increased use of technology to make council activities more accessible?
I think we've done that with the live streaming very much.
Mhm.
so that, yeah, we can use that measure.
All right, so let's tour back up here for a minute. So we've got ensuring alignment of current programs and services with community need, exploring different ways of addressing community need, and engaging with our community and other stakeholders. So right now, our performance measures are number of opportunities for community or stakeholder engagement, the number of methods used, the number of individuals participating in community stakeholder engagement opportunities. Do you want number of complaints received?
It's a form of communication and engagement.
Yeah, you need that.
Okay, number of complaints received, number of recommendations from the service delivery review that are approved and adopted, number of provincial modernization initiatives county participated in, technology implemented to make council activities more accessible. Are those the main things that will tell you, get rid of that one, that you've achieved these objectives or are on the way to achieving them? Are there other ones we haven't thought of?
Yeah, I'm good.
Maybe just one around the alignment. I'm not sure if we have anything that measures the alignment between needs and
services.
so it's almost like we would have to do another survey after we've implemented and adopted some changes to either a survey or just an analysis of whether we can correlate that this is what we heard from the community and this is what we did. That to me would measure, somehow we need to measure that alignment.
You don't do you as a municipality an annual citizen satisfaction survey?
No.
Because that's one way you could, right? Is you ask them about the programs and services, you ask, them questions around satisfaction with it, which would get at that piece of, are your programs and services actually aligned with what the community needs?
So I'm thinking, for example, like rather than another broad survey, which I agree there might be some survey fatigue, but it could be something where we survey just after an interaction, after you use the service. So for example, on the grants committee, we agreed to survey the applicants to see whether the improvements we've made, what we think are improvements, but the changes we've made to the process and the form, did it work for them? So those kinds of, like when you go to a retail store and they give you on your
Yeah.
receipt, they give us feedback, that might be a way to check alignment.
Yeah, so how's the language on this? I'm trying to make it more targeted. So it'd be level of citizen
Yep.
satisfaction with changes in programs and services versus sort of like overall.
Yeah. And I think we could target specific programs we've changed and then just have very specific surveys to specific individuals. Yeah.
What other people think of that? So it's again, some more targeted look at it.
I like the idea of level of citizen satisfaction with all programs and services, not necessarily just changes in services.
Sure,
If I'd get rid of the changes.
sure.
Like that level of citizen satisfaction with programs and services.
And I would assume that if people aren't happy with it, they're going to communicate it, which lends itself to the complaints.
That takes us back up here to number of complaints.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Taxes are too low.
Taxes are too low.
Here's a good complaint. Oh, Mary French, yes. You'd like to annotate. What would you like to do? Oh, that gives you an ability to write on here.
right?
Go ahead, Mary.
She has an advantage.
Muted.
She's going onto the screen to do something.
I think she's trying to unmute herself.
Oh.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, sorry about that. I pushed the wrong button. I'm
Oh,
not great with
it said you
technology.
wanted to annotate my screen.
No, sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to make a comment about the one item of the list there that you had about, could you move the list down, please, Jennifer, so I can see? There was one item that you had on there that I liked. I think it was about lists.
Oh, yeah, there. Development of list of local priorities.
Yes. Honestly, I think that's an excellent idea because when you make a list, you can go back and look at that list and you can see what the priorities were and which ones have already been taken care of, if we've already covered that or whatever. I find that an easy way to keep track of things. And I think it's convenient and you can always just refer to it. Lists are easy to work with.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion, but I think that's a good way of doing it.
What other people think? Would you like to add that one back in?
Who's going to make the list? Council?
You're going to do it at one of your meetings because you're going to identify what are the local priorities. And then you're going to talk about, is there a role for you as a county council in them? That's an action on your work plan as a council.
Just one comment I would have to make. The hardest thing is because the county is the upper tier and we're the lower tier, 90% of the reaction seems to be with the lower tiers. A lot of people have this idea that the county is not directly responsible to them because we're appointed to the county, or where we come because of our positions on our lower tier. So I'm not certain, maybe we should ask, what types of concerns and complaints, et cetera, the lower tiers get concerning county things. I don't know. It's just, I know that we get a lot more interaction at the lower tier level than I do. I get very few questions about county. Certainly get a lot about Central Elgin.
Yeah, so that could be included here. So number of complaints received could also be from complaints that are received at the local municipal partner level as well, not just directly to the county. Yeah.
Because sometimes they are county concerns, but they are still directed at us because a lot of people don't, especially with Central Elgin and the county being in the same building, we have a lot of confusion.
Yeah. So how are we doing with our list of draft performance measures? We got 1, 2, 3, 4,
Too many.
5, 6,
I think so. How are you ever gonna?
You okay with those as your first draft of them?
I'm okay with the first draft. I think there's a lot.
Yeah.
I agree.
Some of them may be consolidated because they kind of just different aspects of the same thing.
Right.
So
These are
it looks like a lot, but maybe it's not.
First cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. All right. Let's take a look at growing Elgin. So growing Elgin, your goal is to be the place where people work and play. You've got 3 objectives there. So that's planning for and facilitating commercial, industrial, residential, and agricultural growth, fostering a healthy environment, and enhancing quality of place. Your strategic outcome is residents and visitors experience a vibrant community that is sustainable. So some sample performance measures from your staff: opportunities to support development explored, community improvement program reviewed, plan developed to support COVID-19 recovery, level of participation in the development of the community safety and well-being plan, number of participants in the local internet summit. So any on that list that you like, that you think will help, that you're planning for and facilitating growth, you have that healthy environment and you're in quality of place?
Definitely the community safety and well-being plan.
All right, so that one.
That would be mine.
Yeah, other ones on the list that you like that you think are good measures for this area?
Community Improvement Program, I would also think, we're going to be reviewing it, and I think that's important. It's a good program.
Other ones?
And are these the goals for this year or for the entire plan, right?
Yeah, these objectives are for the entire plan.
Plan. So do we want to have done more than just reviewed the?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to review it, but will we have, is our goal to have acted on something on the review?
And acted on, yeah,
So
whichever way.
and acted upon or
Implemented, acted upon. Okay. Anything, do you like the one about your local internet summit? So it's your connectivity piece.
I'm not sure to what extent is it being open to, is it? Sorry, I have a lot of questions. I'm just trying to think, is it actually this week and is it really open to the public or are we, can we judge it by the number of participants?
Julie?
So it's not this week.
Right.
We're discussing it this week, but
Okay.
it is in November, and it isn't open to the general public. We'll be, I think, targeting participants through local ISPs and the contacts that we have. In hindsight, I'm wondering if this isn't about the local internet summit. You know, some of these were hard to generate without thinking survey. So as we sit here, perhaps success for the connectivity committee is to be at least working on some sort of solution or making progress in that area. How do you measure it? Towards the ultimate goal, or
So something like that, development and implementation of a connectivity solution.
Yeah, because if we're talking about 3 years from now.
Yeah. Versus how many people came to the summit. Yeah. Any other ones? What about this growth one? Commercial, industrial, residential, agricultural growth. What's a measure around that? Is it number of opportunities to support development that have been explored? Is it actual number of new initiatives? How are you going to measure that you have facilitated growth in those 4 areas in the county in the next 3 years?
I think it would depend on how much activity there is. Obviously, I can't really say, if there's a property that's all of a sudden come on the stream that you've been successful in encouraging that. Julie?
one that we left off the list was just a simple metric of the number of planning applications.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll certainly, so if you have a baseline, you'll know if you've been facilitating it or not. Yeah.
The number and nature of planning applications was
Yeah.
Steve's suggestion.
Yeah. Versus this one.
That's a measurable.
Yeah.
One other, for that fostering a healthy environment, I think the environmental committee that has been set up to see, what suggestions and improvements that they could bring to county services to help foster. So there is a committee now, so they haven't met yet.
So what would be a product or deliverable from them that we could put as a measure? Is it number of recommendations? Are they doing a strategy? Like, what is that committee doing?
They haven't met yet.
Okay.
So to be determined, but I would say that you could measure the number of action items presented to county council from the committee.
So number of action items received from what's it called? Environment. Environmental Advisory Committee, what's it called?
Environmental Advisory Committee. Definitely my team.
Yeah, I would want to be careful that if we're going to measure success by the number of actions, we may be inadvertently pushing action for the sake of action. So I don't think the number is really, in my opinion, like,
Thinking about the number implemented rather than recommended, no?
well, I'm just worried because when you're measuring quantity, you're going to fan the flame that we need more, we need a bigger number, we need more activity, and then we don't necessarily need more. It's the nature.
And
I agree with what Dominique's saying. Number doesn't necessarily mean better, but if the committee is successful in bringing forward actionable initiatives, I don't care if there's 10 or if there's one.
Right.
There's an actionable initiative.
That has a big impact. Not,
It's not broke, don't fix it. You may find that out through study.
That's true, and that may be the actionable initiative from the committee. It says,
By studying it, you find that out.
yeah.
they want to get rid of number in there, Jennifer.
yeah, I'm a little bit worried about number, because we will be encouraged.
Okay. So actionable initiatives. Is it identified by the? No.
Jennifer?
Yeah,
can
Bob.
can I suggest that we simply say the recommendations implemented?
That's what I was saying, instead of numbers.
It's more of a review.
So yeah, that's still gonna get us to number, right? How many recommendations were implemented? So what is it you're trying to get at? Is it, because actionable initiatives still has some sense that there's going to be a number associated with it. So what is it? What's the outcome you're hoping from that environmental advisory committee? What we can measure to say they're successful?
Are we just reviewing it?
I think the ultimate goal is to improve the environmental quality. And that's whether it's natural environmental quality or our interaction within the environment or a number of different initiatives, whether it's the buildings.
The air in the buildings, yeah.
What if do you need to say the environmental advisory committee? Could it be broader, just sort of actionable initiatives reviewed to foster a healthy environment? Like tie it back to something bigger so it's not just from your environmental advisory committee?
The only reason I suggested that was I thought that would be easy to measure.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got it just in generic terms from nowhere, then it's sometimes hard to know.
So how are we doing with this language? Is this the measurable that you'll say check? Yes, we're successful if we reviewed actionable items from the environmental advisory committee?
Just a comment from me. I don't think means anything unless they're implemented. So whether it's the environmental committee or others, they got to be implemented. If we get all kinds of recommendations over the next 3 years and none of them make any sense and go nowhere, that's not success. But if we get recommendations from them and others that we can't say no to because they're sound recommendations, well thought out, and the kind of thing that you can't not do, then implemented makes it work.
What about something like this? Actionable initiatives received from the environmental advisory committee implemented. That are implemented? It's still number. I just didn't say number. Impact of actionable initiatives received from the environmental advisory committee. What is looking at what you're hoping for? Sorry, who said that? Something.
I just said impact could be long-term. Environmental ones aren't always immediate.
Yeah.
Hard to measure the impact.
Want to foster a healthy environment. And I guess it really doesn't matter whether it comes from the environment committee, this council, or wherever it comes from. It's just, what's the measurable to foster a healthy environment?
So what if
Like,
it's
we used to-
actionable initiatives that are implemented to foster a healthy environment?
That's fine.
we used to
Knowing that
report
your
CO2
advisory
emissions,
committee is
right?
part of that.
We don't have to do that anymore, but it's a measurable.
Look at California,
Yeah.
for all the work they've done.
Right. And these are outcomes, again, to clarify, for council,
Mhm.
for the municipality, for the
For the
county.
municipality.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause
So it's for your strategic plan, right? So how
It's
would
for
you
the
know if
strategic
you're
plan.
successful? Yeah.
Okay.
So you have other measurements as well, but these are specifically tied to your strategic plan to say, how well are we doing? Are we sort of hitting what we want to be hitting? Knowing these are your 3-year objectives. This is your strategic outcome. So we've got some planning. So we got number of nature planning applications received. We've got the actionable initiatives for your healthy environment. For enhancing quality of place, we have your community improvement program reviewed and acted upon. We have level of participation in the development of the community safety and wellbeing plan, development and implementation of a connectivity solution. Are there other pieces that you want to measure related to these 3 objectives?
I think we're good.
That's a good draft. All right. So let's go to our final area, investing in Elgin. So your goal is to make responsible financial decisions, and you're going to do that in the next 3 years by ensuring you have the necessary tools, resources, and infrastructure to deliver programs and services now and in the future, and that you are delivering mandated programs and services efficiently and effectively, noting your strategic outcome is optimized use of resources to support an affordable, healthy, engaged community. So staff have put one there, which is level of community satisfaction, and we have that somewhere else. Where was it?
First one.
Citizen satisfaction with programs and services. So that could help over here as well. So I'm going to stick it over here. Is there anything else that would help you know you have the necessary tools, resources, and infrastructure to deliver programs and services in the future, and that you are delivering your mandated programs and services efficiently and effectively?
Yeah, it's Bob. I suggest we throw in there, Jim did a pretty good job with his annual report every time of telling us how much of the percentage of the infrastructure deficit we're addressing. So shrinking that.
So percent of infrastructure deficit being addressed? Is that what the measure is?
Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay. What else would help you know you've got the necessary tools, resources to deliver your programs and services now and in the future, delivering mandated programs and services efficiently and effectively.
I'd rather the word stakeholder rather than citizen,
Stakeholder, yeah, there.
because that includes our lower or our local municipal partners.
Yeah, broader. I'm going to change it over here too, just so we'll look at that. Is there some measure around money? Just because if I keep thinking about sort of the resources, tools, and infrastructure to deliver programs and services now and in the future. So is there something about, I don't know, like level of government, funding from provincial government? Is there something or other pieces around your budget, other places you may get funding from?
I mean, it sounds like there should be something about the service delivery review. A big outcome from the service delivery review is about optimizing the use of resources. So I think
So should we pull this one over? Number of
Yeah.
recommendations, so pull that one over too?
Yeah,
Put it over there, yeah.
because I think completing the review and implementing it is a big milestone.
Yeah, for sure. So one would be completion.
Yeah.
And then one would actually be implementation, yeah. Any other measures to help with measuring these objectives? Certainly, mandated programs and services efficiently, effectively, your service delivery review, key around that one. Tools, resources, infrastructure. We've got stakeholder satisfaction. We've got percent of infrastructure deficit being addressed. Any other ones?
Julie?
I just have a quick thought about the number of recommendations from the service delivery review. Since this is so budget focused, I wonder if that should be expanded to include the amount of savings achieved through these recommendations. Or maybe it's not savings, but efficiencies, the efficiencies achieved through implementation of recommendations. Because some of the recommendations may not hold as much weight in terms of overall efficiencies for the corporation as others. And so I'm not sure that the number actually will measure.
Yeah. So maybe
Provide a valuable
is it just efficiencies achieved through implementation?
Yep.
Yep.
It is, but as a measurable, it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around. Yeah.
And we have to report on it.
For less.
Yeah, it'd be a report because it could be staff, we got efficiencies in this process. We redeployed staff to work on this. So yeah, it'd be more of a narrative around it. Probably.
And I think we have to report that amount anyway as part of the ministry requirement. So.
Yeah. Any other ones for these two? Not hearing any. You've got some good draft performance measures. For some of them, I'll work with staff because what you'll want to do is we'll create let me stop sharing my screen so I can see you. Oh, how do I do that? There we go. There we go. So we'll create a bit of template so you can still have a reporting template around it. Some of them may be numbers, some of it will be more of a narrative. So one of the things you'll want to talk about will be how often you want to have a report from your staff on these performance measures. So knowing they're going to run over the course of the 3 years. By the time you reach year 3, you'll have some good comparative data that you can look across your years to see how you've been progressing in terms of achieving those objectives and goals that you have in your strategic plan. But how often do you think you might want to hear from your staff about their performance measures? Is it annually? Is it? So thinking about your strategic planning cycle, we did your year 1 work plan, right? And staff have a year 1 operational plan. You probably want to build this, look at your performance measures prior to building your work plan. Right? So it should actually help you as you think about your work plan for the next year. How are we doing? What are our measures telling us about achievement for the strategic plan? So I'd say at least you'd want to build it in annually where it fits into that cycle of you take a peek at it before you develop your next year's work plan in terms of implementing your strategic plan. Does that make sense to you? Would an annual look at the performance measures be enough?
And perhaps with the request for any flags along the way, if something is really not tracking, so to only report on an ad hoc basis, if something is about to get off track and not a target not being met, then to flag that. Otherwise, we can assume all is on track and therefore there's surprises at the end of the year in the report.
Right. So annual is part of sort of your strategic planning process, but with ad hoc reporting if things are sort of flagged as running off track. People okay with that in terms of the reporting piece?
And I'm wondering also, Jennifer, as far as finalizing those measures, if we need to connect the dot back to, with the staff's operational plan so that to identify, are there any activities or objectives or things that staff are working on that we may not be planning on measuring? And what does that mean? Does that mean that we're forgetting to measure something, or does that mean we need to adjust the staff's operational plan? So I know that's staff's responsibility, but I'm hoping that part of finalizing those outcomes is that process of connecting the dots.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you want your performance measures to not just necessarily be tied to the operational plan, they should be tied to your objectives. So your operational plan should be helping you achieve your objectives. So really we should see the marker moving on those objectives versus necessarily on the activities that you're doing to get there. So, but we'll look to make sure there's that alignment, right? So if we're doing this activity, is it actually helping us move towards these performance, or have we missed some of those larger performance measures around the objectives? I think that's a good sort of check around that. So I'm going to suggest that then I'll work with staff and we'll do a final draft that then bring back for you to take another sort of a final look at. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
You did good work today on your performance measures.
Okay, anything else you need under strategic planning?
I don't know. Julie, do you need anything else?
No, nothing further, Mr. Warden.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn? Seeing none, do we need a motion for the committee of the whole?
For adjournment.
Nothing under recommendations?
Didn't go into committee, so
Yeah, we went to committee of the whole.
haven't had lunch yet.
Need a motion for committee of the whole recommendations, right? Okay, mover and second to adopt the recommendation from the committee of the whole. Marks, Ketchabah, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
8-0, the motion is carried.
2. And finally, at 1 o'clock, motion for adjournment.
Purcell,
Purcell and Marks, all in favor?
Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden. 8-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Exactly for 2 hours.